Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. As the doors to the boardroom closed behind David, he could still hear the whispers coming from inside. What just happened was as unreal as a nightmare. He worked for Stewart Construction for 12 full years, starting as a junior project manager and building the ailing family business step by step into one of the most successful building contractors on the West Coast. And now, father-in-law Robert Stewart has gone so far as to fire him in plain sight. "You're fired. Pack up your trash and get out." Robert's words still echoed in David's ears. What broke his heart even more was that his wife Rebecca, who was sitting next to Robert, coldly added, "I'm also going to divorce you. You don't deserve anything." They gave him an hour to leave the company building, an hour to end a 12-year career and an 8-year marriage. David walked mechanically towards the elevator, the scene from earlier still playing over and over in his mind. In the boardroom, Robert announces that the company is getting a new CEO, Marcus Kane, a name David has never heard of. And when Marcus stepped out from behind Robert, David felt the world stop spinning. Marcus Kane, 35, handsome, in a custom-made Italian suit. More importantly, David noticed the twinkle in Rebecca's eyes when she looked at Marcus, a twinkle he hadn't seen in his wife's eyes in a long time. A look that once belonged only to him. The elevator doors slowly closed, and David looked at his reflection in the stainless steel doors. At 42, his hair was beginning to thin and there were wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. He suddenly realized that he hadn't really looked at himself in the mirror in a long time. Over the years, he devoted all his time and energy to the company and to creating wealth for the Stewart family. He never thought it would end in such a brutal way. David's office is located on the 15th floor of the corporate building overlooking San Francisco Bay. When he pushed open his office door, he found his assistant Maria busily organizing papers. She is a 35-year-old woman of Mexican descent who works hard and is loyal to David. "Mr. David," Maria looked at him in surprise. "I heard about the board. This has to be a mistake, right?" David forced a smile. Maria followed him for 8 years and was one of his most trusted assistants. "It's not a misunderstanding, Maria. I'm fired." Maria's eyes were filled with shock and anger. "How is that possible? You saved this company. Without you, Stewart Construction would have gone bankrupt." David began to silently gather his personal belongings. Family photos on the table, of him and Rebecca on their honeymoon in Hawaii, of Rebecca smiling in her garden in a white dress, and of them having fun while wine tasting in the Napa Valley. Each photo was like a knife stabbing into his heart. "Mr. David," Maria said carefully, "I shouldn't be telling you this, but..." "But what?" David stopped what he was doing. "Over the past few months, Mrs. Stewart often talks on the phone with a guy named Marcus. She thought I couldn't hear her, but..." Maria's voice was getting smaller. "She made me cancel several dinner plans with you, saying there were important business meetings." David felt a cramp in his stomach. "So it is. Rebecca and Marcus' relationship didn't just start today. What else?" David's voice was unusually calm. "Yesterday, I overheard Mrs. Stewart and her father on the phone. She said the plan is going well and that David doesn't suspect anything." Guilt filled Maria's eyes. "I should have told you sooner." David continued to gather his things, his mind quickly analyzing the information. If Rebecca and Marcus' relationship does exist, and if it was all premeditated, how long have they really been planning this? As David was putting the last of his personal belongings into the cardboard box, his cell phone rang. It was his close friend and attorney, Thomas Miller. "David, I just heard the news. This is crazy. How could Robert do this to you?" Thomas's voice was full of anger. "Things are more complicated than you think, Thomas." David briefly described to Thomas what had just happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "David, this sounds like an elaborate conspiracy. Have you ever wondered why Robert chose to publicly humiliate you today, in front of the board?" David did think about that. Robert could have fired him privately. There was no need to put on this show in front of a dozen board members. Only in the case that, unless they want to make sure I can't turn back. David suddenly realized, the public humiliation has discredited me in the industry, and even if I wanted to start over it would be difficult. Exactly. Also, the timing of Rebecca filing for divorce is odd. Usually, wives make such requests in private. Thomas paused. "David, I need to look into something. Until then, you don't sign any papers and don't agree to any conditions." David nodded, though Thomas couldn't see it. "I understand. The sun was setting in the west when David walked out of the company building carrying the cardboard box. The evening breeze from San Francisco carried the salty smell of the ocean and blew the hair off his forehead. He stood in the doorway of the building and looked back at the structure he had poured 12 years of his life into. The Stewart Construction logo glows in the setting sun. It is a logo he designed himself, symbolizing solidity and eternity. Ironically, he is now banished from the kingdom he helped build. David's cell phone rings again. This time it's Rebecca. "David, we need to talk." Rebecca's voice sounded tired. "What's there to talk about now?" David asked. "About our future. On the division of property." "About," Rebecca paused. "About why we've come this far." David sneered. "Are you trying to explain why you betrayed me? Or are you trying to make sure I get nothing out of the divorce?" "David, please don't. It's not as simple as you think." "Then please explain, Rebecca. Explain your relationship with Marcus King. Explain how long you've been planning this. Explain why you humiliated me in front of the board." The silence on the other end of the line told David everything. "I'll be waiting for you at home," Rebecca finally said. "We need to talk about this face to face." After hanging up the phone, David stood on the street, watching the cars and pedestrians coming and going. Everyone has their own goals, their own life, their own problems. And he just lost everything. But as the initial shock and pain subsided, David found himself welling up inside with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Not the explosive, out-of-control kind of anger, but a calm, calculated anger. If Rebecca and Robert thought he would take it all in silence, if they thought he would crawl away like a wounded animal, then they were sorely mistaken. David Alexander Miller has never been an easy man to beat. He started with nothing and climbed to where he is today through his own hard work and ingenuity. If the Stewarts want a war, then they'll get one. But first, he needed to know the true strength of his enemy. David drove back to his home in Pacific Heights. This is a $3 million Victorian home with a great view overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. He and Rebecca bought the place 3 years after their marriage, when they were full of hope and vision for the future. Now the house feels more like a prison. Rebecca is waiting for him in the living room, wearing a black cashmere suit and holding a glass of red wine. She was still beautiful, 35 years old, well-maintained and elegant in her demeanor. Blonde and slim, she's the kind of woman that keeps men coming back for more. But when David looks at her now, he no longer sees his beloved wife, but a stranger. "There you are," Rebecca said, no emotion in her voice. "Do I have a choice?" David replied, "After all, it's still my home." "About that," Rebecca stood up. "We need to discuss it." David walked over to the bar and poured himself a whiskey. "Let me guess, you want the house." "David, please sit down. I know it's been a difficult day for you, but we need to deal with this rationally." "Rational?" David turned to face her. "You think it's rational to humiliate me in front of the board? You think it's rational to have an affair with another man?" Rebecca's face reddened, but she quickly regained her composure. "My relationship with Marcus is a recent one. Besides, our marriage has been in name only for a long time." "Yeah? When did it start?" David sat on the couch across from Rebecca. "Was it when I was working 14 hours a day to save your father's company? Or when I gave up my dreams to buy you this house?" "You always do," Rebecca burst out. "You always portray yourself as a victim. You know what, David? All these years I've felt like an appendage in your life." "Attachment." David repeated the word incredulously. "Rebecca, everything I did was for our future." "No, it's for your future. Your career, your success, your fulfillment. When have you ever asked me what I want?" Rebecca's eyes were filled with tears, but David now doubted the authenticity of those tears. "So tell me, what do you want?" "You want Marcus King." Rebecca was silent for a long time. "Marcus understands me. He saw the real me, not the me of your wife, not the me of Robert's daughter, but the real me." David took a sip of his whiskey, feeling the burn of the alcohol in his throat. "So why don't you just tell me you want a divorce? Why did you betray me like that?" "Because I know you won't let go." Rebecca's voice became colder. "You'll fight. You'll fight. You'll make the whole thing ugly and painful." "So you decided to make the first move." David nodded. "You and your father planned this. Let me fail in my career and personal life at the same time, so I don't have the strength to fight back." Rebecca didn't deny it, which was a confirmation in itself. "Another thing I don't understand," David continued. Is why Marcus came? Who the hell is he? He is a vice president at Meridian Development, specializing in large commercial real estate projects. There was a hint of pride in Rebecca's tone. He has an MBA from Harvard Business School, and his family has tremendous influence on the East Coast. David understands now. It's not just about love or attraction. It's about social status, about business alliances, about the future of the Stewart family. It's not Marcus' personal charisma your father sees. It's the business value behind him. David says, by letting Marcus run the company and having you marry him, Robert has access to the support and resources of Meridian Development. The look on Rebecca's face told David he'd guessed right. What about me? What is my role in this grand scheme? You've accomplished your mission, David. You saved the company and made it profitable again. What Stewart Construction needs now is expansion, new markets, and opportunities. Rebecca's voice became colder. Frankly, you've reached the limits of your abilities. The words were like a dagger in David's heart, not because of its malice, but because of the truth it may contain. Maybe he did reach his limit. Maybe he really can't take the company to the next level. But even if this were true, it would not justify their betrayal. So you have decided to abandon me, David said. It's like discarding a used-up tool. David, this isn't personal. It's a business decision. It may not be personal for you, Rebecca, but for me, it's definitely personal. David stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the lights of San Francisco began to light up, and the city looked beautiful as night fell. He used to think it was all his, this city, this home, this life. Now he realizes that he was never more than an outsider. I want this house. Rebecca snapped. David turned around. What? In the divorce settlement, I wanted the house. And the vineyards in Napa, and our cabin in Tahoe. What else? Do you want my soul? There was sarcasm in David's voice. Come on, David. You know I have a right to ask for this. And, considering your current employment status, you are responsible for my current employment situation. David could no longer control his anger. You have deliberately ruined my reputation so that I cannot get a job in the industry. That was not our intention. You just want to make sure I can't fight back. David interrupted her. But you're making a mistake, Rebecca. You guys underestimate me. Rebecca looks a little perturbed. David, what do you mean? I mean, if you want a war, you'll get a war. But it won't be the kind of one-sided slaughter you expected. David walks toward the door, then stops and looks back at Rebecca. By the way, I'm not signing any divorce papers, at least not until my lawyers have thoroughly investigated this whole conspiracy. David, you can't. I can and I will. David's voice was unusually calm. You want to play games, Rebecca? Then let's play a real game. David was leaving the house when his cell phone rang again. This time it's Thomas. David, I found some interesting information. Marcus Kane's background is not as glamorous as they claim. What do you mean? Meridian Development is really a strong company, but Marcus is not in a strong position there. According to my research, he's on watch for a series of failed investment decisions. Thomas paused. What's even more interesting is that he is currently facing an SEC investigation involving suspected insider trading. David felt a spark of hope. Is this information reliable? Very reliable. I have a friend who works for the SEC. The investigation is ongoing, but the evidence looks compelling. What does that mean? This means the Stewart family is betting on the wrong thing. If Marcus is indicted, their whole program falls apart. There was excitement in Thomas's voice, but there's better news. What? I investigated Stewart Construction's recent financial situation. On the surface, everything looked normal, but upon deeper analysis, I found something. The company's cash flow is much tighter than the report indicates. David stopped. Are you sure? Absolutely sure. And I suspect that Robert has been hiding these issues, possibly to make the company look more attractive for some kind of deal with Meridian. David's brain began to run fast. If Stewart Construction's finances are in real trouble, and if Marcus's background is tainted, then the whole situation may be more complicated than he initially thought. Thomas, I need you to do something. What is it? I need you to thoroughly investigate the finances of Stewart Construction and all transactions between Robert and Marcus. If there's any evidence of misconduct, I want to know about it. What are you planning, David? David looked at the stars in the night sky. I'm planning to get back everything that's mine. After hanging up, David drove to a downtown hotel. He couldn't go back to that house and face Rebecca, At least not now. He needs time to think, and he needs to make a plan. In his hotel room, David sat by the window overlooking San Francisco at night. The city has never been more beautiful and never more brutal. Here, success and failure are often only a hair's breadth away, and betrayal and revenge are the norm in the business world. David opened his laptop and got to work. He lists all the possible sources of evidence, all the potential allies, all the possible weaknesses of the Stewarts. If they wanted to destroy him, then he would have to destroy them first. It's no longer about saving your marriage or getting your job back. It's about justice, about making those who betrayed him pay. David began to reminisce about all the information he had accumulated during the 12 years he had worked at Stewart Construction. He knows every important client of the company, understands the details of every major project, and is privy to a wealth of trade secrets that could be valuable to competitors. While he has a moral obligation not to misuse this information, if the Stewart family violated business ethics in the first place, then the game has changed. He began by listing some of Stewart Construction's most important clients. The largest of these is Pinnacle Development, a $500 million mixed-use development. The program was personally secured by David, who has developed a great relationship with Pinnacle's executives. If Marcus screws up the management of this project, Pinnacle will likely look for a new contractor. The second most important is the infrastructure contract with the city of San Francisco. The contracts, valued at a total of more than $200 million, involve bridge repairs, road construction, and public building improvements. David has a close relationship with the city's engineering department and understands all of their technical requirements and budgetary constraints. The third is a long-term relationship with several large real estate developers. These relationships are built on trust and a track record of past success, and Marcus, as an outsider, will need time to build that same trust. David realizes that his real strength lies not in the secrets he knows, but in the network of relationships he has built. In the construction industry, relationships are often more important than capital, and these relationships cannot be simply transferred from one person to another. He began to formulate a detailed plan to fight back. The first step was to gather evidence of Stewart Construction's financial problems and Marcus' misconduct. The second step was to use his industry connections to sow seeds of doubt among key customers. The third step is to build a favorable narrative in the media, portraying yourself as a victim rather than a loser. David Alexander Miller is about to show the world that underestimating him is a fatal mistake. The next morning, David sweats it out in the hotel gym. The rhythm on the treadmill helps him organize his thoughts and create a plan of action. The last 24 hours had turned his world completely upside down, but now it was time to take back control. His cell phone rang. It's Maria, his former assistant. "Mr. David, I know I shouldn't bother you, but I think there's something you should know." Maria's voice was strained. "What is it?" David stopped the treadmill. This morning, Marcus Kane had a meeting with all the department heads. He announced a series of personnel changes, and basically everyone who supported you was moved out of key positions. David is not surprised. It's standard power washing procedure. What else? More importantly, I heard him and Robert arguing in his office. Marcus was loud, and I heard him say something about funding gaps and bank loans. Maria paused. "Mr. David, I think the company's financial situation may be much worse than it appears. This confirms Thomas's findings." "Maria, thank you for telling me this. But be careful that they don't find out you're reporting back to me." "I understand. One more thing, Mr. David. Do you remember the Pinnacle program?" "Pinnacle project." David certainly remembers. This is the largest project in Stewart's architectural history, a $500 million mixed-use development. It took David 2 years to win this contract, which is the company's most important source of revenue in recent times. What about Pinnacle? Marcus has a meeting this morning with Pinnacle's program director. I've heard they're not happy with the progress of the project and may reconsider the partnership. David felt a surge of excitement. The Pinnacle program is one that he operates single-handedly, and he understands every detail of the program, including all of the client's concerns and needs. If Marcus botches the project, Stewart Construction will face a huge financial crisis. "Maria, can you do me a favor? I need you to document all of Marcus's important meetings and decisions. But be very careful not to expose yourself." "Of course, Mr. David. I will." After hanging up the phone, David's first plan began to take shape. Instead of attacking the Stewart buildings directly, he'll make them self-destruct. Marcus' incompetence and Robert's cover-up will be their own trap. David took a shower, changed into a suit, and drove to Thomas's law office. On the 40th floor of a skyscraper in San Francisco's financial district, Thomas Miller's office overlooks the entire Bay Area. "You look better," Thomas said, pouring David a cup of coffee. "I'm feeling much better. Anger has an effect of clarifying thoughts." David sat down. "What did you find?" Thomas opened a thick folder. "Lots of stuff. First, on the Marcus Kane investigation. The SEC investigation is much more serious than I initially thought. According to my sources, Marcus is suspected of using his position to facilitate insider trading involving over $2 million. When will the results be available? Probably in the next couple weeks. But even if there were no formal charges, once the news leaked, his career was completely over." Thomas turned to the next page. "The situation is much more interesting regarding the financials of Stewart Construction." Thomas came up with a detailed financial analysis. Ostensibly, the company made $12 million in profits last year. But upon deeper analysis, I found that the number was heavily embellished. How is it glorified? First, Robert used some creative accounting tricks to bring forward future income into last year's books. Secondly, he has deferred the cost of some key maintenance and equipment upgrades, which means that costs will increase significantly this year. Thomas pointed to the numbers on the report. On top of that, the company has a $30 million bank loan coming due that the cash flow simply can't repay. David scrutinized the numbers. "What does that mean?" "This means that Stewart Construction is effectively on the brink of financial crisis. They need a new infusion of capital or a renegotiation of loan terms." Thomas closed the folder. "I suspect that's why Robert was so eager to work with Meridian. He needs the resources behind Marcus to save the company. But if Marcus is indicted, then the whole program falls apart. Not only that, the bank will demand immediate repayment of the loan and the company could face bankruptcy." David stood up and walked over to the window. Below him, in the skyscrapers of the financial district, thousands of people were engaged in various deals and negotiations. Everyone is fighting for their own good, just like he's doing right now. "Thomas, I need you to do a couple things for me." "What is it?" "First, I need you to contact the SEC and tell them that the Stewart building may be connected to Marcus Kane's suspicious transactions. This will speed up the investigation process." Thomas frowned. "David, this could ruin the Stewart building, I know." David turned to face Thomas. "That's exactly how I wanted it to turn out. But it will also hurt a lot of innocent employees. Sooner or later, those employees will lose their jobs because the company's financial situation is simply untenable. I'm just accelerating the process." David sat back in his chair. "Second thing, I need you to contact the legal counsel for the Pinnacle project. I want to meet with them privately." "For what?" "To provide some important information about their current contractors." David smiled, but there was no warmth in that smile. Marcus simply doesn't understand the intricacies of the Pinnacle program. He's about to make a series of costly mistakes. "You want to break this contract?" "I want to make sure Pinnacle gets the quality of service they deserve. If Stewart Construction is unable to provide this quality, then Pinnacle has the right to find a more suitable contractor." Thomas looked at David for a long time. "I understand your anger, David, but are you sure this is the path you want? Once you start, there's no turning back." "The way back?" David sneered. "Thomas, they've ruined my reputation, stolen my job, betrayed my trust. Now you're asking me if I'm sure I want to fight back. I just want to make sure you understand the consequences." "I fully understand the consequences, and I'm ready for those consequences." David stood up. "And a third thing, I need you to look into Rebecca's personal finances. Her bank accounts, her investment portfolio, any assets she might be hiding." "What do you suspect?" "I suspect she's been preparing for this day. If she had known that divorce was inevitable, she might have started moving assets." Thomas nodded. "I'll arrange for a private detective to investigate." "Anything else?" "Not for a while. But Thomas, I need you to understand something." David's voice became very serious. "I'm not looking for legal advice or moral guidance. I'm looking for help to implement a program. If you feel uncomfortable, David, we've been friends for 15 years. I'll help you. But as your friend, I also have an obligation to make sure you don't do something you'll regret. The only thing I regret is not seeing their true colors sooner." David shook Thomas's hand. Thank you, Thomas. After leaving the law office, David drove to a fancy restaurant downtown. He made an appointment to meet someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time. Elena Rodriguez, one of San Francisco's most influential business journalists. Elena was already waiting for him at the restaurant. A 40-something Latina woman, smart, perceptive, and with a nose for business scandals. She was once nominated for a Pulitzer Prize for exposing sexual harassment scandals in Silicon Valley. She has long black hair and always wears professional suits that give her a serious and credible look. David Miller. Elena stood up and shook his hand. I must say, your call surprised me. Why? David sat down and signaled the waiter to come over. Because as I understand it, you were just fired from Stewart Construction. Typically, fired executives don't reach out to reporters. Elena's eyes twinkled with curiosity. Maybe I'm not the executive I usually am. David ordered a bottle of red wine. I have a story to tell you, Elena. A story of corporate betrayal, financial fraud, and abuse of power. Elena pulled out her recording device, but David shook his head. It's not time for an official interview. This is just an informal conversation. Okay, so what are you trying to tell me? David begins to tell his story, starting with how he saved the Stewart building and ending with how he was betrayed and fired. He didn't mention Rebecca's affair. That was too personal. Instead, he focuses on the business side of things, Robert's financial cover-up, Marcus's questionable background, and the company's true financial situation. He detailed the plight of the Stewart building before he took over. The company was facing bankruptcy, mainly due to Robert's conservative management style and resistance to new technology. David managed to turn around the company's fortunes by introducing modern project management methods, establishing a new quality control system, and opening up new market segments. In the first year I took over, the company's profits increased by 25%. The next year, there was a 40% increase. By the fifth year, we had tripled our revenue from when I took over. David showed Elena some of the financials he'd prepared, but now Robert claims I just did the maintenance. Elena listened carefully, asking questions from time to time. As an experienced journalist, she knows how to recognize truth from lies. These are very serious allegations, David. Do you have evidence to back that up? I have some evidence, and more is being gathered. David took a sip of his drink. But I'm not asking you to publish anything right now. I just wanted to let you know the story exists. Why? Because I predict that the Stewart building will be in the news in the next few weeks. When that day comes, I hope someone will be able to provide an accurate and comprehensive report. Elena smiled. You're gearing up for a media strategy. Smart. I'm preparing for the truth. David corrected. The Stewarts thought they could control the narrative and could portray me as an unqualified employee. But there are multiple versions of each story. So, what do you expect me to do? I want you to start investigating, independently and objectively. When the time is right, I will provide more evidence and inside information. But right now, I just want you to know it's worth paying attention to. Elena nodded. I'll think about it. But David, I need you to understand that if I find out you're misleading me, or if this is just a personal revenge scheme, then you shouldn't have covered it. David finished her sentence. Elena, I respect your professionalism. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that goes against journalistic ethics. I'm just providing information. By the end of the meal, David felt that the second part of the plan was also in place. Media attention can put additional pressure on the Stewart family, especially if financial problems begin to surface. Back at the hotel, David finds someone waiting for him. Rebecca is sitting on a couch in the lobby, looking exhausted. She was wearing a simple blue dress and no makeup, which made her look younger than usual, but also more fragile. We need to talk, she said as she stood up. I thought we talked about this last night, David replied, but still gestured for her to follow him to the hotel bar. In a quiet corner of the bar, Rebecca ordered a glass of white wine, her hand trembling slightly. David, I know what you're doing. She opened the door. Yeah? What am I doing? You're trying to destroy us. Destroy my father. Destroy the company. Destroy everything. Rebecca's eyes were filled with anger and fear. Thomas Miller contacted the SEC today. Our lawyer told us. David didn't deny it. So what? How? David, hundreds of families will lose their livelihoods if the company closes. These are innocent people. Like I'm innocent. David shot back. Rebecca, did you consider my feelings when you decided to betray me? Considered my future? It's not the same. Exactly the same. You have decided to sacrifice one person to accomplish your goal. Now I've decided to sacrifice you all to accomplish my goal. David's voice was calm but firm. The difference is that I'm fighting for justice. Rebecca was silent for a long time. What if I told you I was wrong? What if I said I regretted it? Then I would say it's too late. Without hesitation, David replied, Rebecca, you have the opportunity to do the right thing. You can choose to be honest and choose to just tell me what you think. Instead, you chose deception and betrayal. Marcus told me it was the best way. He said if we were honest, you'd make the whole process painful and complicated. Marcus said, David repeated. So now you're letting Marcus make decisions for you. Tell me, Rebecca, are you in love with Marcus or with what he represents? Rebecca didn't answer, but the look on her face told David everything. Let me guess, Marcus promised you a different life. More social opportunities, higher social status, connection to Meridian development. David continued. The question is, Rebecca, when Marcus's SEC investigation comes to light, when he loses his job at Meridian, what else does he have to offer you? Rebecca's face turned pale. What SEC investigation? You don't know? David feigned surprise. Didn't Marcus tell you he was under investigation for insider trading? Didn't tell you that's why he desperately needs a new job? You're lying. Rebecca's voice was weak. Why would I lie? Soon you'll see it on the news. David stood up. Rebecca, you chose the wrong side. Now you must suffer the consequences. David, wait. Rebecca grabbed his arm. What if I told you I wanted to start over? What if I leave Marcus? What if we try to fix our marriage? David looked into her eyes and saw despair and fear. Once, that look would have softened his heart. But now, all he felt was disgust. Rebecca, you're not saying these things because you love me. You're saying these things because you're scared. David gently removed her hand. And even if I believed you were sincere, I could not forgive you. Some damage can't be repaired. So that's it. You're going to destroy us all. I'm not destroying anyone. I'm just letting the truth come out. If the truth destroys you, it is a consequence of your own choices. As David leaves the bar, he hears Rebecca crying behind him. Once, her tears would have broken his heart. Now, they just confirmed the correctness of his decision. Back in his room, David checked his email. Thomas sent a message that the SEC has agreed to expedite the investigation. Additionally, the Pinnacle Project's legal counsel agreed to meet. David received several other important emails. The first came from his friends at the Architects Association, telling him some inside information about Marcus Kane's work record at Meridian Development. The second letter came from one of his former clients asking if he would be interested in working on a new project as an independent consultant. The third letter surprised him the most, from a middle manager at Stewart Construction, expressing concerns about the company's new management. The emails made David realize that he was not as isolated as he had first feared. Having worked in the construction industry for 12 years, he has developed an extensive professional network. These relationships are based on mutual respect and past successes in working together, not on family ties or political power. David began responding to these emails, careful to express his position while avoiding saying anything that could be used against him legally. He knew that these relationships would be his most valuable asset over the next few weeks. The next afternoon, David met with Program Director Sarah Chun and Legal Counsel Michael Torres at the Pinnacle Program's temporary offices. The Pinnacle Project is a $500 million mixed-use development that includes office buildings, shopping centers, and residential units. The project is located in the South Bay area of San Francisco and is expected to be one of the largest mixed-use developments in the region. Sarah Chun is a 40-something Chinese-American woman with an engineering degree from Stanford University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. She is known for her exacting attention to detail and uncompromising approach to project quality. For his part, Michael Torres is an experienced construction law professional specializing in the legal aspects of large-scale development projects. Mr. Miller, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. Sarah Chun said, we understand your recent departure from Stewart Architecture, but we would still like to hear your thoughts on the project. Sure. David pulled out a folder. First, I want to explain why I think it's important to meet with you. David began to explain in detail the complexities of the Pinnacle project, including environmental assessments, building codes, contractor coordination, and more. These are issues that he has personally dealt with over the past 2 years. What's unique about this project is its diversity, said David. We're not only building commercial buildings, but residential units as well, while integrating the existing transportation infrastructure. It requires extremely precise coordination and time management. He explained in detail the 5 main phases of the project: land preparation, foundation work, structural construction, interior fit-out, and landscaping. Each phase has its own unique challenges and technical requirements. The most important thing is the 3rd phase of the foundation work. David points to the project blueprints. This requires special techniques and equipment because of the complex soil conditions in the area. It took me 6 months to find the right subcontractor. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. It was interesting, Sarah said, because the new program manager told us this stage was simple enough to use standard equipment. Marcus Kane said that. David asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes. He also said the project could be completed 3 months ahead of schedule. David shook his head. It's impossible. If standard equipment is used for foundation work, the structural integrity of the entire building is at risk. This not only delays the project, but can also lead to safety issues. Michael Torres, Pinnacle's legal counsel, looks worried. Can you explain in detail? David spent an hour detailing the technical requirements of the project and provided supporting documentation. He explained why special foundation engineering techniques are necessary, including factors such as seismic activity in the area, soil composition, and water table. In addition, David continued, accelerating the project is not only technically infeasible, it is also legally problematic. We are required to comply with several environmental regulations and building codes, which require a specific amount of time to complete inspections and approvals. He showed a detailed timeline of the minimum time required for each phase and why those times could not be compressed. Based on your explanation, Sarah finally said, we think we need to reevaluate our current program management. It was a wise decision. David agrees, but I would recommend that you also consider the overall stability of the contractor. What do you mean? I mean, Stewart Construction is currently facing some internal challenges that may affect their ability to complete a project of this magnitude. David chose the carefully worded expression. As an investor in the project, you have a right to know the financial health of the contractor. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances again. Mr. K. Miller, are you suggesting we change contractors? I am advising you to ensure that your investment is protected. If you have any concerns about the capabilities of the current contractor, you should seek a second opinion. Would you be willing to provide that second opinion? Sarah asked. David smiled. I am happy to support the project in an advisory capacity. Of course, this needs to be done through the proper channels. By the end of the meeting, David knew he had put the first nail in the coffin of the Stewart building. The Pinnacle program is the company's most important source of revenue, and losing it would be a fatal blow. Later that night, David gets a call from Maria. Mr. David, it's getting bad. Her voice was filled with panic. Marcus had a meeting with the 3 main subcontractors today, and it went badly. 2 of them have threatened to pull out of the program. Why? David asked, though he could guess why. Marcus attempted to renegotiate the terms of the contract, asking them to lower the price and accelerate the schedule. But these subcontractors say it's impossible, especially given the technical requirements of the program. David knows about these subcontractors. They are some of the most experienced and reliable companies in the industry, but they won't tolerate unreasonable demands either. Any other questions? The funding issue has become more serious. The bank sent someone to check the company's accounts today. Robert seems very nervous. David nodded. Everything went according to plan. Maria, you need to start thinking for yourself. Update your resume and start looking for new job opportunities. Do you think the company will? I think the future of the company is very uncertain. And when the ship starts to sink, the crew needs to jump ship in time. The next day, David received an urgent call from Thomas. David, you need to come to my office immediately. Things are happening in a major way. In Thomas's office, David finds the lawyer in a meeting with a stranger. The man was in his mid-30s and wore the typical dark suit of the FBI. David, this is Special Agent Johnson of the FBI. Thomas introduced himself. He would like to talk to you about Marcus Kane and the Stewart building. David, sit down and stay calm. Can I ask what this is about? Mr. Miller, We're investigating a complex financial fraud case. Marcus Kane is currently the focus of our investigation, but we have reason to believe this case may involve additional parties. Agent Johnson said, "We understand that you were recently terminated from Stewart Construction, and we would like to get your perspective on the company's operations." "I'm happy to cooperate," David replied, "but I need to understand the nature of this conversation. Am I a witness or a suspect?" "For the moment, you are a witness. We are interested in your experience working with Stewart Architecture, especially any interaction with Marcus Kane." David began to describe in detail his experience at Stewart Construction, focusing on the events of the last few months. He mentioned the sudden appearance of Marcus, inconsistencies in financial reporting, and problems with the Pinnacle program. "Have you noticed any suspicious financial transactions?" Johnson asked. "I don't have direct access to the company's financial records, but I did notice some unusual decisions." David describes his concerns about the company's cash flow and what Robert may be hiding. "Mr. Miller, according to our investigation, Marcus Kane was involved in a series of questionable real estate transactions prior to joining Stewart Construction. These transactions involved the use of insider information and market manipulation." Johnson continued, "We want to know if he continued this behavior at the Stewart building." David was reminded of Marcus' attempts to renegotiate the terms of the Pinnacle project and his ignorance of the project's technical requirements. "If you are asking if Marcus is capable of handling his new position, my answer is no. He lacks the necessary technical knowledge and industry experience." "One last question, Mr. Miller. Do you think Robert Stewart knew about Marcus Kane's SEC investigation?" David thought about that for a while. "I'm not sure. But given Robert's business experience, I find it hard to believe that he handed over control of the company to Marcus without conducting any background checks." After the meeting, Agent Johnson left his contact information and asked David to contact him if he thought of any additional information. "What does that mean?" David asked Thomas. "Which means your plan for revenge may no longer be necessary." Thomas replied, "If the FBI and SEC were investigating Stewart Construction at the same time, the company would probably go out of business on its own." "No," David shook his head. "It's better. Now I don't need to actively attack them. I just need to make sure I'm in a good position when they go down." That afternoon, David made an important decision. He called Elena Rodriguez and told her it was time to publish the story. "Are you sure?" Elena asked. "Once this story is published, there's no turning back." "I'm sure. And I have new information to add." David told her about the FBI investigation, without revealing any classified information, of course. "This is big news, David. If true, this will be one of the biggest business scandals of the year." "Then let it be the biggest." David also provided Elena with more background information on the history of Stewart Architecture, his own contributions, and the current challenges facing the firm. He carefully avoids any statements that could be considered defamatory, focusing on verifiable facts and the public record. "Elena, I want to emphasize," David said, "that this is not about a personal vendetta. It's about business transparency and corporate governance. Investors and employees have a right to know the truth." The next morning, the front page of San Francisco's leading business newspaper carried Elena's article, "Stewart Construction: The Financial Crisis Beneath the Appearance of Success." The article details the company's financial problems, Marcus Kane's questionable background, and the ongoing federal investigation. The article also includes some quotes from David, but they are carefully worded to focus on technical and business issues rather than personal conflicts. Elena maintains objectivity in her reporting while clearly demonstrating the challenges facing Stewart's building. David sat in his hotel room, drinking coffee and reading the article. The article is objective, accurate, and based on facts rather than emotion. Elena did an excellent job. His cell phone started ringing frantically. The first call came from Rebecca. "David, how could you do that?" Her voice was hysterical. "You destroyed us. Ruined my father's life's work." "I haven't ruined anything, Rebecca. I'm just letting the truth surface." David's voice was calm. "If the truth destroys you, it means you were built on lies in the first place. You don't understand. Dad had a heart attack this morning. He's in the hospital now." David felt a moment of shock, but quickly regained his composure. "I'm sorry to hear that. But Rebecca, it's not my fault. This is the result of prolonged pressure and concealment of the truth." "You cold-blooded brute," Rebecca cried. I hope you're satisfied with that. The phone hung up and David sat there, pondering the news. He doesn't want Robert to be physically hurt, but he doesn't feel guilty about his actions either. Robert chose the path of deception and betrayal, and now he must suffer the consequences. Over the next few hours, David received more calls. Some were interview requests from the media, some from potential employers, and some from former colleagues who supported him. The most interesting call came from Sarah Chun of the Pinnacle program. Mr. Miller, in light of recent developments, we have formally terminated our contract with Stewart Construction. She said, we would like to know if you would be interested in taking over the project as a prime contractor. David smiled. I'm interested in discussing that possibility. Okay, can we schedule a formal meeting tomorrow? Sure. This opportunity came sooner than David expected. If he is able to secure the Pinnacle program, it will not only provide him with an immediate source of income, but will also establish him as an independent in the industry. But first, he needed to build his own company. David immediately called Thomas to arrange for company registration. His decision to name his new company Miller Construction Company was simple and straightforward, reflecting the honest, transparent corporate culture he wanted to build. David also received a couple of unexpected phone calls that afternoon. The first came from a department head at Stewart Construction, telling him about the disorganization within the company. The second came from the owner of a large equipment rental company expressing interest in working with David. The third one surprised him the most, coming from a peer he didn't know much about before, who invited him to an industry party. David began to realize that his reputation in the industry was not as damaged as Rebecca and Robert had hoped. Instead, many see him as a competent, experienced professional with whom they would like to work. After hanging up the phone, David realizes that phase 3 of his revenge is about to begin. Not only is he going to destroy the Stewart building, but he's going to rise from the ashes and build his own empire. That night, as David celebrates in the hotel bar, Thomas joins him. Congratulations, Thomas raised his glass. You made it. Stewart Construction is done, Marcus Kane's career is done, and you're about to get a $500 million project. This isn't the end, Thomas. This is just the beginning. David responded. I'm going to build a new company, one based on honesty and competence rather than family ties. What about Rebecca? David was silent for a moment. Rebecca made her choice. Now she has to live with those choices. Do you still love her? David considered this. The Rebecca I love probably never really existed. I love my imagination of her, not the real her. 2 days later, David signed the contract for the Pinnacle project and became the new prime contractor for the project. Not only did this give him an immediate flow of money, but it also established him as a new player in the industry. On the same day, Stewart Construction officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Marcus Kane was arrested by the FBI and faces multiple charges of financial crimes. Robert Stewart remains in the hospital in stable but serious condition. Rebecca tried to contact David several times, but he did not respond. Thomas reports that she is considering moving to the East Coast, away from the scandal in San Francisco. Over the next few weeks, David was busy setting up his company. He poached several key employees from Stewart Construction, including Maria and some of his trusted project managers. He rented an office space in the Soma district, purchased the necessary equipment, and began hiring new employees. Miller Construction Company quickly showed its potential. In addition to the Pinnacle project, David has two smaller but significant contracts. One is a bridge repair project for the city of San Francisco, and the other is a headquarters expansion for a technology company. David's success is based not only on his technical skills, but also on the reputation he has built. In an industry based on relationships, his honesty and reliability became his greatest asset. A month later, David stood in his new company's office overlooking San Francisco Bay. Miller Construction Company has just signed its second major contract and has reached a staff of 50, including many former Stewart Construction employees, including Maria. The company's success has given David a deep sense of fulfillment, not just because of the financial success, but because he has proven his worth. He doesn't need to rely on family ties or political connections. He can build a successful business on his own. His cell phone rang. This time it was an unexpected number. David. The voice was weak, but he recognized Robert Stewart's voice. Robert. David responded simply. I want to talk to you. Is that okay? David thought about it. Where are you? Hospitals. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I would like you to come. There's something I need to tell you. An hour later, David stood in the doorway of Robert's hospital room. The old man looked much older. His hair was completely white, and his eyes had lost their former sharpness. Illness and stress have obviously taken a huge toll on him. David, Robert said weakly. Thanks for coming. David sat in the chair next to the bed, but didn't speak. I want to apologize. Robert continued. I know apologizing won't change anything, but I needed to say it. Why? David asked. For your conscience? For the truth. Robert struggled to sit up straight. David, you need to know that betraying you was not my idea. Whose idea was that? Rebecca's. Robert's voice was almost a whisper. She came to me 6 months ago and told me she was leaving you. She said she had met someone else and she wanted a new start. David felt a cramp in his stomach, but he kept his composure. Then why did you agree? Because I'm a fool. Because I want to make my daughter happy. Robert's eyes filled with tears, but mostly because the company was really facing financial problems and Marcus promised to provide the resources we needed. So you decided to sacrifice me. I told myself it was a business decision. I told myself you'd understand, that you'd find other opportunities. Robert looked at David. But the truth is, I'm jealous of you. What? David, you have accomplished in 2 years what I could not have accomplished in 10. You saved my company and made it more successful than ever. And I, the founder of the company, became a redundancy. Robert coughed a few times. When Rebecca gave me a reason to get rid of you, I grabbed it. Because my pride can't stand to admit that I need you. David looked at the old man for a long time. You know what, Robert? If you'd been honest with me about all this in the first place, maybe we could have found a solution that would have worked for everyone. I know. That's why I said I was a fool. Robert held out a trembling hand. David, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I now realize your value. David looked at Robert's outstretched hand, but didn't take it. Robert, I appreciate your honesty, but it doesn't change what's already happened. I understand. Robert withdrew his hand. There's something else you should know. Rebecca and Marcus' relationship is over. When he was arrested, she immediately abandoned him. It's no surprise. David stood up. Robert, I hope you recover. Really, but it's over between us. I understand. David, what? Take care of yourself. The company you've built, everything you've done, proves that you deserve success more than all of us. David nodded and left the room. Outside the hospital, David took a deep breath of fresh air. Robert's apology didn't change anything, but it gave David something he'd been seeking, the full truth. Back in his office, David finds Maria waiting for him, holding a stack of papers. Mr. David, we've just received invitations to bid on 3 new projects. She exclaimed, if we can win 2 of these, the company could double in size. David smiled, the first real smile in months. Then let's start preparing the bids. Later that night, David stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over San Francisco at night. The city is still beautiful and still full of opportunities. But now he sees it in a different light. He's no longer the same man who naively believed that loyalty and hard work were enough. He now understands the rules of the game of power and what it takes to survive in this world. His cell phone rang. It's Thomas. David, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that Rebecca signed the divorce papers. The bad news is that she asked to see you once. I don't want to see her. I understand. But she said she had something that belonged to you to give back. David thought about it. Okay, but in my office, with you present. The next afternoon, Rebecca shows up at David's office. She looked haggard, wearing a simple black suit and no makeup. She was holding a small box. David, she said, her voice soft. Rebecca. David responds, but doesn't stand up. She put the box on his desk. These are your things. Your college ring, the watch your father left you, and some pictures. David opened the box and saw the familiar items. Each one represents an important moment in his life, an important person. There's one more thing. Rebecca pulled a letter out of her bag. This is my letter of apology to you. I know a letter can't make up for what I've done, but I need you to know how much I regret it. David didn't pick up that letter. Rebecca, I don't need your apology. What I need is to never see you again. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. David, I know I ruined everything for us. But believe me, I did love you. Maybe you loved. David finally stood up. but apparently not deep enough to stop you from betraying me. If I could start over. But you can't. David's voice was firm and cold. Rebecca, some mistakes can't be undone. Some betrayals are unforgivable. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences. Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I understand. David, I hope you find happiness. I hope you find someone who truly deserves you. I will, David replied. But that person won't be you. As Rebecca turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. David, what? I want you to know that despite my mistakes, those good times we had were real. At least for me. David doesn't answer, and Rebecca leaves. After Thomas closes the door, David sits back in his chair and picks up the letter Rebecca left behind. He looked at the envelope, then put it in a drawer without opening it. There are words he doesn't need to hear, explanations he doesn't need to understand. The past is past. It's time to focus on the future. 6 months later, Miller Construction Company was one of San Francisco's most successful construction companies. David employs 150 people and is working on 5 major projects, including an $800 million downtown redevelopment project. He moved out of the hotel and bought an apartment in Nob Hill, clean and modern, with nothing that would remind him of his past. He started dating and met some interesting women, but hasn't found anyone special yet. One evening, David was working late at the office when Maria knocked on the door. Mr. David, there's someone here to see you, she said. She said her name was Amanda Foster and she was a reporter for Architect magazine. Amanda Foster is a 30-something woman with red hair, green eyes, and confidence. She wanted to write an article for the magazine about David and his company's success. The rise of Miller Construction is truly a fascinating story. Amanda says, from the ashes of the Stewart building, you have built a stronger, more successful company. It's not about revenge, David clarifies. It's about building something real and lasting. But you must admit that there is a certain irony. 6 months after you were fired, you became your former employer's biggest competitor. David smiled. I prefer to think of it as justice being done. 2 hours into the interview, David found himself captivated by Amanda's intelligence and insight. She asked pointed but fair questions that showed her deep understanding of the construction industry. As she packs up her equipment and prepares to leave, David makes an impulsive decision. Amanda, I was wondering if you would like to have dinner? Not for the interview, but just because I enjoy our conversations. Amanda smiled, and it was a genuine, warm smile. I'd love to, David. As they left the office together, David looked back at the company he had built. Miller Construction Company's logo glows in the night light, symbolizing his journey of rebirth from the ashes. This company represents not just business success, but a personal rebirth. He rose from the ashes of betrayal to build something entirely his own. The Stewart family thought they could abandon him, thought he'd disappear in silence. Instead, they taught him a valuable lesson. True strength comes not from inheritance or manipulation, but from competence, determination, and the courage to get back up in the face of adversity. At the restaurant, David and Amanda talk about architecture, art, traveling, and dreams. It was the first time in a long time that he felt truly relaxed and happy. Amanda is smart, independent, and has her own career goals, which is exactly the type of partner he needs right now. You know, Amanda said, I looked into the collapse of the Stewart building. That's a classic example of how a family business can fail because of a lack of professional management. Yes, David agrees. But the most important lesson I've learned is that you can't trust people who see you as a tool rather than a partner. So now what? What's your plan? David looked into Amanda's green eyes and saw curiosity and interest. Right now, I'm focused on building something lasting. It's not just the company, it's the personal relationships. When David returned to his apartment that night, he felt a new sense of hope. Maybe it's time to start a new chapter, not just in business, but in your personal life as well. The next day, David received an interesting phone call. His president of the San Francisco Society of Architects invited him to speak at the annual convention. We want you to talk about entrepreneurship and innovation in the industry, said the president. Your story is a great role model for young architects and engineers. David accepted the invitation. This will be his first opportunity to speak publicly about his experience and an important step in building his reputation in the industry. In preparation for his presentation, David reflected on his experiences over the past year. It's a complete journey of transformation from betrayed husband and fired employee to successful entrepreneur and industry leader. But the most important changes are internal. He was no longer the easily trusted, easily deceived man. He now understands how to protect himself, how to recognize true friends and enemies, and how to survive and prosper in a world of deceit and betrayal. On the day of the presentation, the town hall was filled with industry professionals. David stood at the podium, looked down at the audience, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "Today I want to talk about more than just business success," he began. "I want to talk about resilience, the ability to get back up in the face of a major setback." He tells his story, of course omitting the most personal details and focusing on the challenges on a business and professional level. He talks about how to turn failures into opportunities, how to learn from mistakes, and how to build a business based on honesty and competence. David received a round of applause at the end of his presentation. Many came to talk to him and express their support and admiration. One of them is a young female architect who tells David that his story inspired her to start her own business. "You prove that it is possible to start over and succeed even in the most difficult situations," she said. David smiled and replied, "The key is to never give up and never let others define your worth." That night, David and Amanda had dinner again. Their relationship is steadily growing, based on mutual respect and common interests. "I'm so proud of your speech today," Amanda said. "The way you handled those difficult issues showed true leadership." "Thanks. But I must admit that the experience taught me a lot about myself." "Like what?" "Like I'm stronger than I thought I was. For example, I don't need to rely on others to define my success." David paused. "Like I deserve a partner who really values me." Amanda reached out and took his hand. "I'm glad you learned that." 2 years later, David stood in the top-floor office of Miller Construction Company's new headquarters. The company now employs more than 300 people, is working on more than a dozen large-scale projects, and has annual revenues of more than $200 million. More importantly, the firm has built a reputation based on honesty, transparency, and professional competence. Miller Construction became a model for the industry, proving that a company can be successful without relying on political connections or family ties. David's personal life has also changed in a positive way. His relationship with Amanda develops so well that they even begin to talk about the possibility of marriage. For once, he knew he had found a truly understanding and supportive partner. That afternoon, David received an unexpected email. It's from Rebecca, from her new address in New York. "David," the email began, "I know I don't have the right to contact you, but I wanted to let you know something. I've seen the news reports about your company's success, and I'm happy for you. You deserve all this success and more. I also want you to know that I now realize how serious a mistake I made back then. I lost a good man, and because of my own greed and stupidity. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that my regret is sincere. Rebecca." David read the email and did not reply. He deleted the email and went on with his work. The past has truly become the past. That evening, David and Amanda dined at their favorite restaurant. "You look happy today," Amanda observed. "I am indeed happy," David replied. "I think I've finally let go of the past completely." "That's fine, because I have some good news for you." Amanda smiled and said, "Architect Magazine has decided to recognize Miller Construction as Firm of the Year." David looked at her in surprise. "Really? Really? You'll be on the cover, along with a detailed feature story." David felt a surge of deep satisfaction. This honor is not only a recognition of his business success, but also a confirmation that he has rebuilt his life. "Another thing," Amanda continued, "is that I've been thinking about our relationship, our future." David's heart is racing. Yes, yes, David, I love you. I love your strength, your honesty, your determination. I want to build a future with you." David reached out and took Amanda's hand. "I love you too, Amanda. And I want to give you something Rebecca could never give me: total honesty and loyalty." As they embraced, David felt a sense of completeness that he hadn't felt in a long time. He's finally found someone who truly understands him, someone who won't betray him for his own gain. A year later, David and Amanda were married. The wedding was simple and elegant, with only the closest of friends and family in attendance. Thomas served as David's best man and Maria as one of the witnesses. On their honeymoon, David and Amanda visited some of Europe's famous buildings. Standing in front of Notre Dame de Paris, David reflects on his life's journey. "You know," he said to Amanda, "if I hadn't gone through all that betrayal and pain, I never would have become the person I am today. I'll never build my own company, and I'll never meet you." "Are you saying you appreciate Rebecca?" Amanda asked jokingly. David thought about it. "No, I don't thank her. But I thank myself for choosing to fight back instead of surrendering." Back in San Francisco, David received an interesting offer. An international construction company wants to buy Miller Construction, offering $1 billion. David considered the offer, but ultimately declined. "This company is more than a business," he told Amanda. "It's a part of who I am." Points. It proves that one can start from scratch and build something of real value. David Alexander Miller is no longer the betrayed husband or the fired employee. He is now a successful entrepreneur, a loving husband to his wife, and a respected industry leader. The Stewart family had tried to destroy him, but they had only taught him how to become stronger. Rebecca betrayed him once, but she only cleared the way for him to find true love. 5 years later, on a fall afternoon, David stood in the top-floor conference room of Miller Construction Company's headquarters, presiding over one of the most important board meetings in the company's history. The company just won a $2 billion international project that will make Miller Construction one of the largest construction contractors on the West Coast. The conference room was filled with investors, partners, and senior management. These include Thomas, now the company's legal counsel, Maria, now the director of human resources, and a dozen young executives that David has trained from the ground up. "Folks," David said, "this program represents not just a financial success, but a victory for our company's culture and values. We are proof that a business based on honesty, transparency, and professional competence can succeed in a competitive market." After the meeting, David returned to his office. On the walls are a variety of awards and certifications that the company has received, including the most recent Employer of the Year award. On his desk was a picture of Amanda and their 2-year-old son, a perfect family, built on mutual respect and genuine love. His secretary knocked on the door. "Mr. Miller, there's a lady who wants to see you." She said her name was Sarah Patterson from Financial Week. David nodded. Financial Week, one of the nation's most respected business magazines, wanted to do a cover story on Miller Construction's success story. Sarah Patterson is a 40-something professional journalist known for her in-depth investigative reporting. She sat down and went straight to the point. "Mr. Miller, it is truly impressive that your company has become an industry leader in just 5 years. But I am more interested in your personal story. It is my understanding that you previously worked at Stewart Construction and then left for some reason." David, stay calm. "Yes, I did work at Stewart Construction for 12 years. The reason for leaving was simple. I wanted to build my own company and realize my vision. But according to my research, Stewart Construction went bankrupt shortly after you left. It's not a coincidence, is it?" David smiled. "The problems with the Stewart building existed before I left. The company lacks modern management methods, is in a precarious financial situation, and lacks the ability to innovate. These problems ultimately led to its downfall." "What about the arrest of former CEO Marcus Kane?" "That's a separate legal matter that has nothing to do with me." David's tone stays professional. "I'm focused on building my own company rather than focusing on the competition." Sarah nodded, clearly impressed by David's composure and professionalism. The interview lasted an hour and covered the company's history, management philosophy, and future plans. After the interview, David looked at the time. It was his and Amanda's 3rd wedding anniversary, and he was going to pick her up from work and celebrate together at their favorite restaurant. On the drive to the newspaper where Amanda works, David passes the building that formerly housed Stewart Construction's headquarters. The building is now owned by another company, and the Stewart Construction sign has long since been removed. Robert Stewart died 2 years ago, reportedly alone in a nursing home. Rebecca supposedly still lives in New York and does some charity work, but never returns to San Francisco. David felt no pity or regret. They chose the path of betrayal and now bear the consequences. When he arrives at Amanda's office, he finds her packing up for her shift. She is now a senior editor at the San Francisco Chronicle, specializing in business and economics coverage. "How's it going, honey?" Amanda asked. "How did the interview go today?" "It went well," David replied. "But right now I just want to focus on more important things, like our anniversary dinner." They drove to a fine dining restaurant overlooking the bay. This is where they had their first date and where David proposed to Amanda. In the restaurant, they talk about work, family, and future plans. David mentioned the firm's latest project, and Amanda shared a series she is investigating on urban development. You know, Amanda said, sometimes I think about the stories you've told me about the Stewart building, and I think it might be one of the best things that ever happened to you. Why do you say that? Because if that hadn't happened, you never would have built Miller Construction and we never would have met. Amanda reached out and took David's hand. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to the best opportunities instead. David nodded. He'd never thought of it that way, but Amanda was right. If Rebecca hadn't betrayed him, if Robert hadn't fired him, he'd probably still be working for someone else's company right now, never realizing his potential. After dinner, they drove home. Their house, located in Marin County, is a modern house with spacious gardens and children's play equipment. There is nothing here that would remind David of past painful experiences, only happy memories and hope for the future. When they arrived home, the babysitter told them their 2-year-old son Jacob was asleep. David crept into his son's room and watched the tiny being sleep quietly. With Amanda's red hair and David's blue eyes, Jacob is the perfect crystallization of their love. David realizes that this is the real victory. It's not about destroying the enemy or succeeding in revenge. It's about building a life full of love and meaning. The success of Miller Construction, his happy marriage to Amanda, and the birth of Jacob are the result of starting his life over. The next morning, David woke up at 6 a.m. as usual for his morning run. The running route passes over the Golden Gate Bridge, one of his favorite views. During the run, he contemplated the future growth of his company and the well-being of his family. When they got home, Amanda was already up and was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for Jacob. This scene of everyday bliss gave David a deep sense of fulfillment. Any special plans for today? Amanda asked. The board is finalizing the new international program today. If all goes well, we could start our first project in Europe next year. David replied as he sipped his coffee. That means you might have to travel a lot? It may be necessary in the beginning stages, but we already have a local team over there. I don't want to miss a moment of Jacob's growth. This was a major reason for the failure of David and Rebecca's marriage. He devoted too much time to his work and neglected his family relationships. Now, he has learned to balance work and family, which makes his life more fulfilling and meaningful. On his way to work, David gets a call from Thomas. David, I have some interesting news for you. Thomas said, do you remember Marcus Kane? Sure. What happened to him? He was just released from federal prison at the end of his sentence. From what I understand, he's looking for a job now, but no company wants to hire him. David didn't feel any sympathy. That's a consequence of his own choices. One more thing. Rebecca contacted our law firm last month to ask if she could contact you. For what? She didn't say exactly why, just that she wanted to talk. David thought about it. Tell her I'm not interested. The past is the past. I'll pass it on. David arrives at the office to find Maria already waiting for him. Mr. David, I have good news. Yesterday's board resolution was passed and the European program is officially launched. In addition, we received 3 new project proposals, all for large infrastructure projects. David smiled. It looks like we need to keep expanding the team. Yes, HR is already planning to hire. We expect to increase the number of employees to 500 next year. This steady growth makes David proud. Miller Construction is not only a successful business, but an example of how honesty and hard work can pay off. That afternoon, David attended the monthly meeting of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. As one of the most successful local entrepreneurs, he is often invited to such events. At the conference, he met many old friends and business partners. One of them is Elena Rodriguez, the journalist who helped him expose the truth about Stewart's Construction. She is now the West Coast head of a national media company. David, it's good to see you again. Elena said, I've been following Miller Construction's development, and it's really impressive. Thanks, Elena. And I want to thank you for helping me in the first place. That's just what I do. But I must say that the way you handled the whole situation was very professional. You focus on building rather than destroying, and that's the mark of a truly successful person. After the meeting, David drove home. On the way, he pondered Elena's words. Indeed, his ultimate success was not because he succeeded in taking revenge, but because he chose the constructive path. In the evening, David helps Amanda give Jacob a bath and then reads a bedtime story together. These simple family moments were the most precious moments of his day. When Jacob falls asleep, David and Amanda sit in the living room and enjoy some quiet time. "You know," David said, "sometimes I think about that night 5 years ago when I found out that Rebecca had betrayed me, and I thought my world had ended. But really, that's a new beginning." Amanda responded, "Yes, without that experience, I never would have discovered what I am truly capable of, never would have met you, and never would have had Jacob." Amanda is leaning on David's shoulder. That's the marvelous thing about life. Sometimes the biggest failures lead us to the biggest successes. David kissed Amanda's hair lightly. "I love you, Amanda. Thank you for giving me a real family." "I love you too, David." They sat quietly, looking out at the stars in the night sky. David felt complete peace and contentment. He has built a successful business, has a loving family, and has found the true meaning of life. The next day was Saturday, and David decided not to go to the office, but to spend a full weekend with his family. They planned to go to a vineyard in the Napa Valley, one of their family's traditional activities. In the vineyard, Jacob excitedly ran between the vines. Amanda took pictures to document the moments, and David felt the warmth of the California sun. "This is the life I want," David told Amanda. "Simple, real, and full of love." "We're lucky," Amanda replied. "Not everyone finds that kind of happiness." David nodded. He knows that he is truly blessed, but he also knows that this happiness is earned through hard work, perseverance, and making the right choices. As they were driving home, David's cell phone rang. It's an urgent call from the company about an important project that's about to start next week. After David handled the call, Amanda asked, "Is everything okay?" "Yes, just some technical details to confirm," David replied. "I may need to make a trip to the site tomorrow." "That's okay. Jacob and I can go to my mom's." This understanding and support was something David had never experienced in his previous marriage. Rebecca is always complaining about his work, while Amanda understands his passion for his job, but also how important it is to keep his family together. That night, after Jacob fell asleep, David and Amanda enjoyed a bottle of wine on the back patio. "David, I've been meaning to ask you a question," Amanda said. "Have you ever regretted getting revenge on Rebecca and the Stewarts?" David considered this. "I don't see that as revenge. I think it was for justice. They betrayed me and tried to ruin my reputation and my future. I just made sure the truth was revealed and that they suffered the consequences they deserved." "But do you still feel anger now?" "No." David shook his head. "Anger is a wasted emotion. I'm focused on building now, not destroying. That's one of the reasons I love you. You learn how to turn negative experiences into positive motivation." David held Amanda's hand. "I learned what's really important. It's not about revenge or proving yourself. It's about building meaningful relationships and creating something of value." They sat quietly, enjoying the peace of the evening. In the distance, the lights of San Francisco twinkled, but David's attention was fully focused on the woman beside him and the sleeping child upstairs. That's real success, David thought. It's not about defeating the enemy or gaining revenge. It's about finding love, building families, and creating meaningful work. His cell phone rang again, this time an international call. David looked at the caller ID and then turned off his cell phone. "Not important?" Amanda asked. "There's nothing like this moment," David replied. "The work can wait until tomorrow, but these moments can't be repeated." Amanda smiled and kissed David on the cheek. "I'm glad you learned that." It was late at night, and they packed up the deck and prepared to go upstairs to bed. David took one last look at the night sky, then followed Amanda into the house. Tomorrow is another day, full of new opportunities and challenges. But no matter what happens, David knows he has what matters most: a loving wife, a healthy child, and a successful career. That's enough. That's all he wanted. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.